As you know, the students are going to hear from somebody very special tomorrow, Lois Lowry. Lois Lowry's book dealing with the Danish resistance. Historically, at about the identical date that the Nazis came into Denmark, there were some interesting things which occurred in Norway, which have impacted one of our fellow citizens here in Jamestown. About 15 years ago, Jim, Sherry Cadwell, Marty Idzig, Greg Peterson, Mike Foley of our office invited Jim down to have lunch with us one day. And we did it in our library and absolutely was riveted with his explaining his life story during his youth, which involved Norway, an area which literally was the day after Denmark was taken, Norway was taken by the Nazis. So literally I've twisted the arm, and he'll be glad to tell me that I've twisted his arm, to relay a story which is not easy for him to relay. I want to pause and to show a little bit of a video that I put together to help put Jim in Norway and to put things into context. So with that, I'll pause, we'll dim the lights, and we'll show this short video.
We begin with the story of David versus Goliath. Norway, a neutral country with no tanks, practically no heavy guns, and virtually no army, defends itself against the awesome war machine of Nazi Germany.
In 1940, neutral Norway is coveted by Adolf Hitler. 1,700 miles of jagged coastline for his ships and U-boats, air bases nearer Britain, and a port, Narvik, for high-grade iron ore shipped by rail from Sweden, thence by ship to Germany's war factories. Narvik is ice-free, open year-round. On April 8, 1940, the Allies notify the Norwegians that minefields have been laid in Norway's territorial waters to halt this German sea traffic. The crisis finds Norway utterly unprepared. Since 1905, when she gained independence from Sweden, her king, elected by the Norwegian people themselves, has been Håkon VII, a towering Dane. He has a ragtag army of 13,000 men. No tanks, practically no heavy guns. His air force consists of 70 ancient planes and 125 pilots. Against them, the German Luftwaffe, greatest air force in the world. The German Navy, the German Army. April 9th, 1940, the first coordinated air-sea land operation in history. Nazi Germany strikes at neutral Norway. For 4 days, the Norwegians have been warned. The Nazis are on their way. Skeptical, Norway has not mobilized its 200,000 reserves. The Germans drop 6 companies of airborne troops on Oslo by noon. Oslo surrenders. The king and government flee. Within 12 hours, the Germans have landed 8,000 men from warships, hold every key position, every major airport in Norway. To the south, Hitler has blitzed Denmark in a day. It will take longer in Norway. We are a longer country, comments one observer. Some of the invaders speak excellent Norwegian. As children, they were sheltered here after World War I. Now they return. German commander General Niklaus von Falkenhorst is here too. He has been in an Oslo hotel posing as a silk stocking salesman. Also here, Major Vidkun Quisling, Norwegian fascist who proclaims himself head of a new government. An ex-Bolshevik whose party has no political influence, his reputation will far exceed his role. April 10th, 1940, D+1, Oslo. Rumors spread that the British fleet is counterattacking, will shell the city. A mass psychosis grips the people. They try desperately to flee. The Norwegians call it our day of panic. By nightfall, the rumors and the exodus end. In the countryside, Norwegians try to mobilize their forces. Some of those who vow to fight have never used firearms before. Some troops guard the king and government who have fled north to Elverum near the Swedish frontier. June 10th, 1940. All Norway is in Nazi hands. Military unpreparedness has done it, not Quisling and his fifth column, a noisy Nazi 1%, loathed by the Norwegian people. Thrown out of office 6 days after the invasion, reappointed puppet minister president in 1942, Vidkun Quisling is a posturing figurehead with no power. The real power is at his side, tough German Reichskommissar Josef Terboven. A Norwegian bishop describes him. He is something incomplete, something which never ripened. At first, the Nazis try a velvet glove occupation. We come as friends, blood brothers, chosen Nordics all. They cannot grasp the depth of hatred among Norwegians. By September 1940, the Iron Fist takes over. Nazification, Gestapo, Quisling stormtroopers, search, arrest, concentration camps. Largest of the concentration camps is Greenie near Oslo. Its director, a sadist named Kunze, quickly introduces Hitler's new order to 20,000 Norwegians held here. Brutality, torture, and death. Many of Norway's 1,500 Jews will be incarcerated here. Many will not survive the war. Soon there will be 10,000 Gestapo in Norway, one for every 300 citizens. On May 7th, 1945, it is all over. After 5 cruel occupation years, Norwegian justice moves swiftly. 17,000 Quisling collaborators are arrested. The German Reichskommissar, Josef Terboven, retreats to his personal air raid shelter, lights a fuse attached to a ton of explosives, and blows himself up. Arrested and tried for treason, Vidkun Quisling will be shot by a firing squad on October 24th, 1945. History will remember only his name, synonym for traitor. For those German troops trapped in Norway, conquerors now confined, treatment is correct but vigorous. At Greenie concentration camp, where so many have suffered, there is a final poignant muster.
Dagen forgikk meg på ulykkens dag. Tenkte på bønna om de skulle brenne, og ville mannskap mot fienden har. Følende freden ble glad i min ånd, og grep til min sida med levende hånd.
During the occupation, 40,000 Norwegians have been arrested. Some 2,000 of them have died. 336 innocent hostages have been executed in a vain attempt to stop the persistent sabotage. Now the liberated prisoners march into Oslo, there to join in a swirl of freedom their fellow citizens, men of the resistance who need hide no more. Norwegian expeditionary forces return to their homeland. And finally, on 2 joyous days, their crown prince and their king. These days were anticipated in 1942 in words spoken by an American president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. If there is anyone who still wonders why this war is being fought, let him look to Norway. If there is anyone who has any delusion that this war could have been averted, let him look to Norway. And if there is anyone who doubts of the democratic will to win, again I say, let him look to Norway.
I'm now thrilled to introduce Jim Sorg, who was probably one of those faces in that film. Jim.
I'd never seen that film. It's kind of touching to me because I can remember a lot of the things that happened. People jumping up on trucks and the tanks running down the middle of the street, the German troops marching down the streets. It was quite a show. A lot of things that I was going to talk about turned out to be on film. Thank you for inviting me, Greg. You told me to keep it under 3 hours, and I'll do my best. But so often, and I'm speaking now of you young kids, so often we forget how good we have it. We can assemble. A meeting like this was prohibited in Norway during the war. You couldn't have it. Couldn't speak freely. You had very little clothing, very little food. So if you kids don't think you got it pretty good, you go home and thank your uncle that was in the war, your aunt that was in the war. Or next time you see a guy walking down the street with a uniform on him, just walk over and say, "Thanks, mister." "Thank you, ma'am." They'll appreciate it. But anyway, my story goes, I was born in Olean, New York. We moved to Jamestown when I was a very little boy. My father, my mother, and I, we lived there for a few years until a time came when it was March of 1940. My mother was a Norwegian citizen still. I was, of course, an American. I was born down here. But my mom got a letter from her aunt. I'm her sister, my aunt, and this letter indicated that my grandmother was very ill, deathly ill, and I, of course, had never seen her. Mom wanted me to go over to Norway and see my grandmother, and we boarded a ship in New York called the Stavanger, which was just a passenger ship, and we proceeded to go to Norway in March of 1940. I'll never forget, we were turning the southern tip of Norway, a little bit outside of a town called Stavanger. And we noticed that the crew aboard this ship were looking out at sea and everything. We all kind of wondered what was going on. And we all looked down, we could see submarines out off the shoreline of Norway. But of course we didn't pay any attention to them, but they were talking about them and they were pointing at them and everything. And we never did think too much about it. But we made it all the way to Oslo, which is the capital of Norway. And by the time we got there, my grandmother died. And we stayed a few more weeks, and all of a sudden on April 9th, it was in the morning, and it had to be somewhere between 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. We heard this rumble. I mean, we heard oodles of planes going over the top of our homes, bombs going off, small arms fire going off. But mostly there were police and fire department vehicles with speakers telling us, evacuate the city right now. And they didn't give us much of a reason. but they were driving up and down the street telling us to get out of town. And it's kind of funny to see it on the film. My mother and I, of course, we grabbed a couple of changes of clothes and ran out of the house, got out in the street in front of our home, and there was an old man with a truck. And he was driving up the road, and he saw my mother and I come running, and he stopped long enough for one of the passengers in the back of the truck to grab my mother and haul her up on the back of the truck, and I jumped up. And you saw that on the picture just a couple of minutes ago. You saw these people gathering on, and we had a truckload. We had no idea where we were going. Absolutely no idea, but we knew we were getting out of town. As it turned out, we went up into the mountains, which was about maybe 10 miles away from Oslo. We stayed there for about 4 or 5 days until we were told that it was safe to come back into the city. Well, we returned to the city. There were Germans all over. And one thing I forgot to tell you, the sight of the German paratroopers coming out of the sky, and the trucks on the road, and the jeeps they had, and what have you, it was scary. I mean, we had parachutes on top of houses, middle of the street, lawns, and they were all over. I don't know how many paratroopers they dropped on Oslo, but it seems to me they said 6,000 on the film. And I think it was about five or six times that, but I was a little guy. When we returned, these soldiers were all over. They were patrolling the streets. Most of the time they were patrolling 2 and 2, and they were going up and down the streets, and they had their vehicles that were driving alongside the roads. And the majority of these German soldiers, I want to be quick to say, they all didn't have horns and tails. There were a lot of good Germans. But the ones you had to be afraid of were the guys that had the brown shirts, swastika on their arm, black pants, and we called them the SS or the Gestapo. But there was one element that was more scary than the Gestapo, and that was the Norwegian traitors. We were scared to death of those people. You didn't dare to talk to them or tell them your thinking the way you were brought up. You didn't dare to say anything to them, because if they didn't like you, they'd turn you in, and whether you said it or not, you're on your way to someplace else that you never knew whether you knew we were going to come back or not. But those traitors, there was an awful lot of them. And they were basically led by, you saw him, Vidkun Quisling. He was head of the minority government in Norway when the Germans came in, and he helped them organize and take over the city and the country. He was a fat guy like me, but I'm a lot cuter than he was. We had a lot of respect for the Germans and the Norwegian traitors. And while I was there, being an American citizen, now keep in mind that I was 7 years, or 8, close to 8 years old when the Germans invaded Norway. I was 14 when we came back to this country. But during the entire German occupation from 40 to 45, every single Friday, I reported to the Gestapo with a card that they had to stamp. Now, I was as much danger to them as Stanley is to me. They had no fear for me. I was just a young kid. They did take my mother in one time. They were questioning her about one of her brothers. I had 2 uncles over there. They were in the Norwegian underground. One of them was about to end up in a divorce court. Oswald. And right now, Oswald, he found himself in a lot of trouble. He wasn't coming home nights. And his wife, she thought he was out kind of fooling around. So they talked it over and decided that they were going to get a divorce. The day they were going to go into divorce court was the day the Germans surrendered. The very day. He came out in the morning with a beret, an Norwegian armband, and a Thompson machine gun over his shoulder, and told his wife what he had been doing. He'd been running a printing press at night for the Norwegian underground. The marriage lasted for an awful long time, and as a matter of fact, they both passed away as a married couple. My mother and I were there alone. We had my mother's side of the family that lived very close to us, but now we had to survive. My mother was a young girl. She was in her late 20s when we went over there. And my mother took a job scrubbing floors at a facility similar to our YMCA. When I say scrubbing floors, she was on her hands and knees just about all day to try to provide a living, provide food on our table. I got a job in a little muffler shop due to a friend of ours. It lasted about a year and a half. I was about 12 years old at that time. And enjoyed it, made a lot of money. I think I was making something like $1.50 a week. But I had a job. Tell you some things that we did, which kind of unusual. You know, in front of your house, you got a nice lawn out there. We were in an apartment house that we got, and there was a big lawn out there in front of the apartment house. And all the people that lived in this apartment house were allocated a portion of that lawn. And we turned that lawn into we grew potatoes, carrots, anything you could grow in there, and we took pride in the fact that we had the best looking farm crop that ever came out of that area. But as a schoolboy, one of the requirements that we had was that during the spring and the fall, we were required to go up on the big farms outside the city and work those farms for the purpose of raising crops for the German soldiers. We had to go in the spring and plant the harvest, and in the fall, we went and dug up the produce, dig up 3 carrots, we ate 2 and gave the one to the Germans. That's how, I mean, we fattened up just like bears do. We were really eating. I don't know if any of you people have ever eaten a raw potato. God, they're good with a little salt on them. They really are. We got to eat an awful lot, and I'll tell you something, I don't know what we'd have done if we hadn't gotten some of that crop in our belly. We had no meat whatsoever. I can't remember ever having meat over there, but I remember going down to the docks. My uncle had helped me make a muskie net, okay? And I'd go down to the docks, and I'd sit at the edge of that dock and waiting to see if a school of sardines or a school of shrimp or maybe an eel would come by, some herring, and I'd scoop down there, and one scoop, I might have about 150 shrimp in the basket. when I went home, I'll tell you something, that was the greatest thing that ever happened. But this is how we fed ourselves. We were very poor. We were just making it. And I don't know how my mother ever did it, but we were just making it. And we had nothing extra. A lot of the kids that I ran around with, they had bicycles. I've never had a bicycle in my life. Never. Well, my wife has, of course, heard that story 100 times. But I want to tell you about a time when I was on my way to this work camp, which was about, maybe about 6 miles away from where I lived. And you saw the concentration camp on the film, but there were several other encampments around Oslo. And being that Oslo was very close to Russia, there was an encampment just up the road, and I had to go across. I went across this, and the road went up, and the encampment was right next to the road. And every time I go up there was several Russian prisoners that were just sitting around and shooting the breeze amongst themselves. But this one kid kept waving at me every time I go by, and he might have been maybe 16 years old at the most. But he'd always wave at me. I'd wave back to him. Of course, they had the guards that were patrolling these encampments. On this particular encampment, 2 Germans and a German shepherd, and they walked the perimeter of this fenced-in area. Well, this one day, we could see the Germans were way down on the other end of this enclosure, and this little Russian boy waved at me and he went like this. I turned my head, I wasn't about to get shot, but he had something in his hand. And I reached through, I ran over to the side of the fence, which was probably from here to the wall over there. And he gave me this little carved out bird that he had made from stone, but it was all wood, but he carved it out with a stone. He gave it to me, and I thanked him for it, ran back to the road and kept on going and went up to the farm. Well, I went home that night and I told my mom about this little Russian boy. And I said, Mom, is there anything that we had that I could give him? Jim, we don't have anything. Well, I noticed a little black bread, a little heel of a loaf that we had that was left. And I said, do you think I could give him that? And she said, sure you can. So I went up the next day, and there he was waving. And oddly enough, the soldiers had gone around the side, so there was nobody watching me. And I went like this to him. So I ran over to the fence, and he ran over the fence. And he reached through the fence and grabbed that loaf of bread. And I could see his hands were all bloody. They had pulled every fingernail that he had under his hand. The Germans had done this. I started crying right off the bat, and I'm having a hell of a time right now. Pardon my English. But I'll take that to my grave. I'll never forget that sight. A lot of things that happened to me were shown on the film. We talked about, or we saw, the air raids that we went through, the number of air raids. There were weeks that we were in an air raid shelter 4 to 5 times all night long. Planes were coming across, the English Spitfires. They'd come over and bomb. And of course the Stukas were on their tail. We saw a lot of dog fights. For those of you that don't know what that means, one is chasing the other. We'd be out in the street and we could see these dog fights right over the city. And many times one of them didn't make it. But most of those airplanes were actually coming from England. And that's where the king had fled from Norway. He went out and he sought sanctuary in England while the Germans were occupying our country. And he spent his entire years over there in England and waited for the war to end, and then he came back to Oslo. Some of the people that you saw on the film, I had actually seen alive. I was just telling Ronnie here, the guy in this picture right here is Adolf Hess. I saw him at least 5 times myself in Norway. He didn't look any different than what he does right now in that picture. In addition to Hess, I saw Himmler, von Ribbentrop. Of course, I saw Quisling many times. I saw Goering once. And Turbo, we saw Turbo around the film. I was calling Raleigh's attention to that. I saw him one time. Von Ribbentrop, I saw maybe 4 or 5 times. And of course, Vidkun Quisling, I probably saw him 100 times. And the thing that I want to remember about Vidkun Quisling is that after the war, when the Germans surrendered, I believe it was somewhere around May or something like that of 1945. When they surrendered, the Norwegian underground came up from underground, and they were rounding up all the high officers in the German Wehrmacht, all the Norwegian traitors that they could get their hands on. A lot of them got shaved, their heads got shaved. They undressed them, ran them down the middle of the road and stoned them and whipped them and did everything they could possibly do to them. These people were running down the middle of the road naked. You saw a Norwegian kicking another one by the hind tail. I think that was a little bit staged because that's not the way it happened. The Norwegians were mad. They truly were mad, and they reflected that on that particular day when the Germans gave up. But they also rounded up Hitler, Vidkun Quisling, and they gave him a trial. And of course, this trial was well publicized. And they even indicated after they had given him a sentence of death by a firing squad, and they told the people when it was going to happen and where it was going to happen. Right alongside the fjord of Oslo, there's a big castle, Akershus we call it. And for those of you that have been in Oslo, chances are you've been through this fortress. But anyway, they indicated that at 6 o'clock that particular morning, he was going to be shot. Well, the docks are right down below this fortress, and the night before this happened, the execution took place. I think everybody in Norway were down by the docks. I mean, there were people falling into the fjord off the docks. It was so crowded. But they were dancing and they were screaming and yelling, and the fiddlers were going, and the music was as though it was a festive activity that was taking place down there. You could hear accordions for 20 miles. But anyway, the funny thing is, it happened with bonfires lit all night long. Everybody stayed right there on the docks. And around quarter to 6 in the morning, the execution was going to take place at exactly 6 o'clock, they told us. At quarter to 6 in the morning, you could hear a pin drop. And I'm talking about a lot of bodies down there. You could you couldn't hear anybody breathing. And all of a sudden, you heard the volley of the execution from the fortress right next to us. And once again, the accordion started to play and the fiddlers were doing this and everybody was hugging and kissing, and that was the end of that night. During the time that we were over there, I didn't mention this, but I saw my first killing when I was 12 years old. A friend of mine and I were going to a movie, and we were walking down the street and we saw these two German patrolmen come towards us, and all of a sudden they made a left-hand turn and they went into this alley. And they were walking down this alley for some reason, and it was a dead end. I believe it was a dead end alley. And exactly when we got to that alley, the entrance to the alley, we saw 4 Norwegian underground people jump out of a side door, jumped over the top of them, and were stabbing these guys. They went down, and of course the Norwegians, they went back in the room, or back through the door, disappeared. The next morning, exactly 12 o'clock, in one of the town squares, the Germans had rounded up 15 Norwegians, taking them right off the street, and they executed them right in that little square. And of course they let us know that they were going to do that. But that's their way of getting back to those underground people in Norway, that they weren't going to tolerate it. But I saw that killing. And of course I've seen a lot of killings after that, because I spent a lot of time in Korea during the Korean War in 1952, and I participated in some of that killing, I'm sad to say. I just wonder what would happen. I just wonder what would have happened if we took out Saddam. Or what if we'd have taken out Hitler in 1933? Something to think about, isn't it? We'd have taken him out, or somebody had taken him out. Can you imagine all the lives that have been saved because he was a madman? And of course, so was Saddam. But I've always thought about that. It bothers the daylights out of me, because he certainly took over and he was very impressive, and he shook up the world. We returned, before I say that, we had 3 chances, 4 really, 4 chances to come back to the United States during the war years. We tried 3 times to get across from Norway to Sweden and cross the border. Each time we were stopped by the German border patrol and the dogs. Then on the 4th time, we had an opportunity to go to Portugal, and get aboard an exchange ship. They were taking the Germans from the United States, and they were taking the Americans from Europe, and they were exchanging them. And we had a chance to get aboard a ship in Portugal and get back home. My uncle told us not to do that. Mom got scared and decided, no, we're going to stay. That ship was torpedoed just outside of the Mediterranean, in the Atlantic really, but just outside the Mediterranean Sea. During all this time we were in Norway, my mother was writing to my dad, and my dad was writing to my mother. All my dad's letters were coming back, return to sender. And it was the address where we lived. But all of a sudden, here we were on our way back from Norway to the United States. He got wind of the fact that we were coming home. He met us in New York City. And him and Mom sat down and talked it over. He explained that he assumed was dead because there was no whereabouts. He assumed he was dead and he had remarried. Kind of tough. But those were the warriors. They talked it over, decided, okay, we'll leave it as it is. And Dad stayed married to his second wife till she passed away in Olean. And then later on, he passed away. My mom remarried, and a year ago, last October, at 94, Mom passed away. I choke up a little bit when I think about the sacrifices my mother made. And I'm a big boy now, but she worked her butt off for me, and to see to it that I got what we had, she would share it and get food in my belly. Of course, when I got home, I changed all that. Who's laughing? But anyway, the thing is, a lot of the things you saw in that film right there, that's the way it happened. Germans would take people, and people would disappear right off the face of the earth. An example like that was, we had a soccer team in the city that I belonged to. We had little sports clubs, and I belonged to this one sports club, and I had a good friend of mine. I went to school with him and everything else. Herman. Can't remember his last name. But we were out on a soccer field playing soccer one Saturday or Sunday, and all of a sudden this big canvas-covered German truck pulled up alongside the soccer field. And a Norwegian guy came out from the front. 2 German troops jumped out from the back of the truck, and they were pointing out in the field. And all of a sudden the coach called for Herman to come over there. Herman was a Jewish boy. They grabbed Herman by the arms, threw him in the back of the truck. His clothing was still on the sidelines. Never saw Herman again. We took his clothing to where he lived. The door was still open in their apartment. His parents had gone. Nobody ever seen his parents again. Herman just disappeared off the face of the earth. One heck of a nice kid. Great soccer player and a good friend. But that's the way it was. This was the way we lived. You didn't dare to tell anybody about what you think, because if it got back to the Norwegian traders or to the SS troopers, you'd be in a lot of trouble. Well, I was very fortunate to come back to this country. I had to start in junior high school again, because I couldn't read, write, speak, couldn't even swear in English. But they sent me back to junior high school after I had graduated from high school in Norway. I graduated the summer that we came back. So they started me in Lincoln Junior High School over here. And I finally graduated from Jamestown High School. 2 weeks after I graduated, I joined the Marines and became a tank commander over in Korea during the Korean War in 1952. And like I said, I was part of a lot of killing over there. And I saw how the people lived in Norway during the war. And I saw how the people, the South Koreans, and some of the North Koreans, how they lived over there. And it was just like growing up again, just like seeing the whole thing unfold in front of my eyes all over again. So I was glad that I had joined up, and I was glad to be a part of it. You hear stories today about the boys that are over there in Iraq. They want to go back. So next time you see a guy in a uniform, you say thank you. Because you've got a lot of things to be proud of. And you kids are a heck of a lot better than what we were when I was your age, I can tell you that. You're better educated, you've got a lot of things that you got going for you. Make the best of it. I finally got out of the Marine Corps, married and what have you, and I got I got a son up there someplace. He keeps doing this to me. What does that mean? But anyway, my son and I got 3 grandchildren someplace, and I love every one of them. I had 3 great kids and 3 of the greatest grandchildren a man could ever want. The other day, my wife and I were married 41 years. Can you imagine her being with me? 41 years? That's for you, Sorg. I've never been back to Norway since we left in 1947. I don't have fond memories of Norway. I never have. But I think that before God comes and takes me, I'd like to make one trip over there. I was talking to John Selstrom a couple of minutes ago, and I was asking John, I know you've been in Norway and Carol, and I said, do you remember this particular park called Frogner Park? No, how about Vigeland Park? And he said, oh yeah, I know where that is. And the funny part about it was that there was no statues over the bridges that are part of this park. And all these statues are naked babies, naked men, naked women, in all types of configurations, and probably the most beautiful park you ever saw in your life. Those of you that have been to Norway or Oslo, you probably know what I'm talking about. But the centerpiece of this particular park is a huge, monstrous spear like granite and intermingled bodies all the way up through. While we were going to school, Vigeland, who was sculpturing all these things, this spear was 30 feet in the air at the finish, I believe. When I went by as a schoolboy in 1942, he was up to here with that centerpiece. And he was chipping away, didn't pay any attention to us, but he was chipping away, making that thing. And if you ever get to Oslo, go down to that park, go through it, and when you get to that centerpiece, say, hey, the guy I saw it was only 4 feet up. I'm going to close because Steve keeps doing this faster and faster. Do you have any questions? Fire away at me. I'll do the very best I can. But I will say this, that I don't care about doing these kinds of speeches because I'm not a good public speaker. But I will tell you this, that if 1 or 2 of these kids get anything out of this thing, they're living under tyranny and living under hardships that some of these kids in Iraq are living under, or we lived under during the German occupation. Do the best you can to keep this. The American government is not the best in the world, or not that good, but I'll tell you it's the best in the world. Let me say it that way. You have it made in this country, and people love you. So if there's any questions, fire away. I'm not sure I can. Thank you very much.
Wow. To Jim Sorg, to Lois Lowry, who put that into prose, that which Jim lived. And we're all the beneficiaries of both your life and Lois's ability to do something which obviously is bringing out a large crowd tonight and a large crowd tomorrow. And to all you folks who came great distances to come and to share this extraordinary personal experience and to share tonight and tomorrow Lois's wonderful experience. And to all the winners here, you know, we all applaud you and say thank you very much.